Hello, I'm Megs Reynolds, the Executive Director of the Do MoreAgriculture Foundation. We are the national voice and champion for mental health in Canadian agriculture. And joining me today is Tara Ernst, and she is the president of Caglary Beyond the Blue. Tara, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
And our topic for today is burnout, and you are speaking of experience with supporting someone, correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. We're going to start off with what advice would you give to anybody else who is starting to see signs of burnout in somebody in their life? That could be a family member, a community member, etc.
I think the biggest thing is knowing when to have that conversation. I think a conversation has to happen, but also being very intentional about when that conversation is. So maybe not when they just get home from work or they, when you can tell they're elevated, right? Try to maybe take some time away. For my husband and I, it's the hot tub, right? We set aside time, and that's when you can kind of maybe lower some of that defensiveness potentially on it and have a real conversation. And then I would say, just I notice that you've been, more edgy or lately. How is everything going? Is there anything I can help support you with? That kind of maybe approach. Not you're grumpy,
Nagging.
horrible to deal with, right? All of that kind of stuff. So I think it's, again, a little bit about being intentional about the time, but also being intentional about how you approach it.
Yeah, I like your comment about I've noticed this. Is there anything I can do to help? Because that, anytime I think as humans, we're quick to anytime somebody points out something that we take as we're doing it wrong, that we want to bristle up and get defensive. And so I think that following that up with is there anything I can do to help is great. Does it, if you're seeing signs and you want to have that conversation, is there any benefit to kind of preceding it by saying, I'd love to have a conversation with you later, but, let's take some time to kind of decompress from the day or from what's going on maybe on farm or where somebody is, and let them know that you would like to talk about something at a different time?
Yeah, I think so. I think, again, it's another removal of that potential defensiveness. Now, I mean, your spouse best. Like, if I were to say that to my spouse, he probably would be like, okay, well, let's talk about it now. Right. And in which case you could say, no, I still think it's nothing major, but we just need to have a conversation. And I think, why don't we have maybe have a suggestion for a time, right? I'd really love to get together, after we put the kids to bed. Can we do no TV, no phones or something, and just kind of reconnect, right? Like, sometimes even just that, I want to reconnect with you because I feel like we've been really busy and we need to come back together. And then maybe that approaches it in a softer light too.
Yes, I feel like that takes the fear out of it. Like, if
Yeah,
it's more about reconnecting than about like, we need to talk later.
totally.
What would be like for you in your experience, what have been some of the signs that kind of were clues to you that maybe burnout was happening and that you did need to kind of start to have that conversation?
I think the number one thing for me was just the kind of the negativity that we can all kind of get caught in it a little bit here and there, but what used to be either fun or enjoyable, just maybe they weren't doing it or they're more hesitant to do anything. I think, again, more irritable maybe, right? Just more snappy kind of at everything. And I think that was a big one. And then just kind of, yeah, tiredness, kind of, lethargy, like just feeling really kind of down and maybe not as maybe hopeful or joyful or, kind of more on that negative kind of side of things.
In your experience, has there been anything around like sleep disruptions or changes in sleep patterns?
Well, I'm married to a shift worker, so sleep disruption and patterns are definitely constantly. Um, but yeah, and I would say even maybe more alcohol, right? Or that's another thing. But again, which then impacts your
Mhm.
sleep, which
Yes.
impacts your quality of sleep, right? Again, we have, Garmin watches that both my husband and I look at, and I know they're not like meant to replace doctors and sleep doctors, but it's a way to approach like, hey, how have you been sleeping? Do you feel more tired? Like it could just be a something to kind of bring up too.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good point. And I think, alcohol is something that gets used fairly common in agriculture, and I think just in society as a whole. So I think it's important to bring up because it really is one of those indicators, or can be one of those indicators for so many different things with
Mhm.
mental health, right? As one of those, initial self-coping mechanisms or self-medication when we have stuff going on, or we're extra stressed, or we're extra overwhelmed with what's going on in our life.
Absolutely.
What advice, or would your advice change for approaching someone, uh, depending on what was going on in their life at that time? Like when we look at farming, we have certain seasons where you can be experiencing burnout or other things, but that doesn't mean you're not at a point where you can walk away from what needs to be done. If it's harvest, you have to put those hours in when you can put those hours in, and that there isn't a lot you can do. So do you have any suggestions around for someone how to approach that, or how they could support maybe in those times where they understand that, or they can identify that something is going on, but maybe it's not the best time to try to have that conversation or support that person in a way?
Totally. I mean, there's lots of things here. I mean, you can look at, maybe it's making sure that they have proper nutrition, right, during that time. And sometimes it feels like you're sacrificing a lot during that time. And I think it's important not to go to the point where you're just taking over everything. You don't enable them to maybe have bad behavior, but you also have the ability to go, you know what, let me take some of this off your plate right now, knowing that it's a busy season and there's nothing you can do about it right now. And then maybe in the quieter moments, coming up with some strategies going into those times, right? My husband went through promotion, which was really, stressful. And that's kind of after that is where we saw the burnout. But it was during that time where I was maybe a little more grace for them, right? Knowing that their stress level was going to be higher. That again, that doesn't mean them getting away with everything, but also maybe just taking better care of, again, making sure they have good nutrition, good meals, trying to set the scene for them and supporting them in that way. But I do think it's important to kind of have maybe some look, we always know this season comes, right? Especially with farming. It's like this happens every year. It shouldn't be a surprise anymore. So what can we do next season that better supports so that we can support you as a family, but we can also make sure that we're getting supported as well? Like what are some tools and some strategies around that? I think the conversation piece is huge.
Yeah, that's really important because I mean, we do that with everything else, right? If we look
Mhm.
at harvest as the example, we'll make sure all of our equipment's ready to go before
Mhm.
we get into the field, and our mental health and our family structure and our ability to support each other. And I think those boundaries are part of what you're referencing as well.
Mhm.
Those are all things that we should be adding to that list. That's
Yeah.
that pre whatever inspection should also include those pieces that keeps everybody functioning at their best, because they have that support, and that can look different during that busy season. Have you found it to be hard? Like, is it hard to find that line of giving grace and being the support person and not burning yourself out in the process?
Yeah, I think that's always, again, with shift workers, that's probably very similar to, farming. It's like, I mean, we have our needs too, right? And our lives are stressful in its own way, right? If you're, a spouse of a farmer, and all of a sudden you have the kids' activities are fully yours, maybe that time, or maybe, I think it's just making sure that as a couple, you're really talking about what are we doing as a team in this moment, right? And we can recognize that, yes, your stress is here, but it also impacts the family. So maybe having, those feedback, like when you do this, this is how it impacts the rest of the family. Because I think sometimes you forget that there's a ripple effect, right? And I think that when you're dealing with somebody that's in a high stress situation, you carry a lot of that too. And so I think you still need to have boundaries around that, right? And you kind of know what those are, or like the areas that may get crossed over. And I think you just have to have some either language around that, or it's also okay to stand up for yourself or look for maybe support in other areas. Maybe it's not your spouse during that season, but you set up with your girlfriends, an opportunity to get together and go like, I just need to decompress. Could you help me with this? Right? Because it may not be your spouse at that time that could give that to you, but you've planned ahead and made sure that you're taken care of too.
Yeah, utilizing that community that we all
Mm.
build around us, and being comfortable to say, hey, I need that moment, or can we have that conversation? And I think for most, probably, if I'm approaching you saying, hey, I really need to chat, there's a really good chance, especially in agriculture, if everyone's kind of in the same season at the same time, that they might also need that as well.
Totally. And yet we have such a hard time asking for that, right? And we feel guilty that we should have it all together and that we should be strong enough to, we've been doing this for so many years. And it's like, no, that same person is probably thinking that same way. So community is huge, right? I really believe in having people that understand what you're going through, so that they can, it might just be a text message like, are you exhausted, or are you whatever? And they can just go, yep, what do you need, or whatever, right?
Yeah. Is there any, we're talking very much about kind of that family dynamic, the spouse dynamic. Have you been in a situation where you've been able to recognize signs in somebody else, possibly like a coworker or a community member, and been able to have a conversation with them, or felt comfortable, or any advice that you would give on that piece?
So kind of within the community, is that what you like, or is
Maybe
it
it's
with
a
my spouse?
friend.
A
Well,
friend.
maybe it's a friend that maybe they've changed their communication style with you, or someone who posted a lot on social media and suddenly they're
Mhm.
not, or something going on where you're like, maybe there's something there. What would you suggest for people? Is it kind of that same approach that you would take with your spouse?
Yeah, absolutely. I've done that many times with first responder families, right? And I think it's that same approach. It's, you know what? Hey, I noticed that you, again, have been posting lots of articles about,
Mm-hmm.
policing in the States, right? Like, I just want to check in and make sure you're okay. I know that, the stress of the job or whatever is there. Um, do you want to go for coffee? Like, I find that it's easy to say, no, I'm good, I'm fine. But I think really trying to like show up and say, let's go for a coffee, or do you want to go for a walk, or can I take your kids, or just something to show them that you're fully there to kind of support them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I like the can I take your kids too. I
Yeah,
can see that at Harvest, that for many people that would be a very, very helpful thing to be able to
totally.
offer if you're in that
Us first
position.
responders too. Yes.
Is there anything that we haven't touched on yet that you feel that people should either be on the lookout or be aware of when they're either being that support person, or trying to have the conversation, or looking for signs in their spouse or in their community members?
I would say just a couple things. I think that even people that look like they have it all together, I really think that, anxiety, overwhelm, it people mask pretty good. People hide how they're truly feeling really well. And
Mm-hmm.
and so I think it's important to reach out to all of your community and your friends, right? Maybe suggest having a night at your house, right? Hey, just gonna put on some tea and coffee and snacks or potluck or something, right? Because I think that people need that connection more than ever right now. I think it's especially with the COVID and all of that kind of stuff that we're really seeing the impacts of not being in person. And I think that people are craving that in person. And then I would say the other thing that I think, my husband and I talk a lot about is just intentionality, right? It's really easy to get caught up in life and just the busyness of every day. And, there's one thing that I was told early on before my husband and I got married was there will always be things that try to, split you apart or divide or create a division. And that includes job and, your kids, unintentional or intentional, right? All of those things that you need to kind of be really intentional about your own relationship. And so I think if we're talking about within your own household, it's like really being intentional about where your priorities and where that is and what that looks like. And I think those connection points, right, as a couple, and that forced communication of how things are going, that, how are you doing? I know, those where it's not always just when things are really bad. It's, how are you doing this week? I noticed that you seem more tired. Everything okay? Like just those little check-ins are really important as a couple, to ensure that you can be strong moving through some of the harder times.
Yeah, it's more that mitigation, right? Don't wait until it's gotten to the point where you're like, oh wow, this is, something's going on. I need to reach out or, be intentional with that conversation. I think it's so easy, to your point, just you get caught up in everything you need to do. And on the farm, there's a never-ending list of projects that need to happen. And then you have the seasonality of what's going on. And yeah, it can be very easy just to kind of exist within your own silo, even though you're within your family dynamic. And while you were speaking, what kind of came to mind was, in business, we'll have regular check-in meetings, right? To see how all the teams are doing, what's going on. And that's, would do that with your farm employees. So it shouldn't be any more different with your family, right? And even with the farm employees, that could be part of it. Is it's not just a check-in on, what that task list looks like, or is the equipment ready, or all of those things, but how is everybody doing actually? Like, we've had a hard week. How's everyone doing on sleep, on stress, on all of those things? But yeah, making a point to check in regularly instead of waiting.
Totally. And really knowing your staff or your people, right? Who their kids are, who, what kind of things they care about, because I think that it's really easy to just be like, we don't mix work and pleasure or the outside, their home life. And it's like what we need to start realizing, I think everywhere, and this is just your home life impacts your work life, just like your work life impacts your home life. And so instead of being like, I don't want to get involved, it has not, it's none of my business. It's like, well, it is your business, because it may impact their ability to, their safety. It may impact their, their productivity. You don't know what they're going through. And I think if we can really create an atmosphere everywhere, I am really talking globally here, like really that peer support, right? Rather than thinking that we need, therapists and all of that is super important, but I think we could avoid kind of getting to that critical part if we really started taking care of each other, right? We really started reaching out to our, our people and, your staff on the farm and everybody, and just being like, hey, how's your kid doing at school? How's hockey going? Right? Really look at them as a person, because they'll work harder for you if they recognize that you care, right?
And that just opens up, to me, the conversation, right? And that's how we change culture, not just in agriculture, but like you said, like globally change culture. So we get to a place where we are all encouraged and empowered to take care of our mental well-beings and look after each other. And that's been a mandate with Do More, right? It's cultural change, and it starts with one conversation at a time, and creating that space and being intentional about looking out for others and having some of those more awkward conversations to us right now because we're not used to having them. We didn't grow up having them, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's everything you said, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing. Is there anything else before we sign off that you think people should know or talk about?
No, thank you for inviting me to the table for this. And I think it's amazing to see that, across the board that people are starting to talk about these things that are impacting so many people.
Yes, I don't know if we would have been sitting here having this conversation 5-10 years ago. So
I
I'm
know.
so happy we're here, and I'm so thankful for you taking time with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
If anyone's looking for more resources or to learn more about mental health in agriculture, you can visit domore.ag.